Alright, wrap up time for Legacy Enchantress. So, the deck was sweet. We played some really cool matches. We were playing in a league because it's hard sometimes to get games in the two-player queues. So the level of competition was actually pretty solid, and the deck still performed well. But I had three main takeaways from the deck. Overall, we went 3-2, which is fine. We started off 3-0. We didn't even lose a game in our first three matches, and then kind of fizzled towards the end. And the cutoff was our first three matches were regular decks, a storm, creature-based decks, etc. Then in matches 4 and 5, we played Emrakul decks, and Emrakul is a whole nother story for our deck. So, Solitary Confinement, combined with all our other enchantments that let us draw cards and keep it around, is so amazingly good against decks that don't have Emrakul. It is pretty close to unbeatable if we can lock that in with Sterling Groves for protection. We just have Shroud, we can't take damage. It is so hard for us to die. But Emrakul gets around that because of Annihilate. So even though we're not taking damage and we have Shroud, after a turn or two of attacking, Emrakul is just going to annihilate away all of our stuff, and we're going to lose anyway. So that is kind of the problem. I don't think it's that we just literally cannot beat Emrakul decks. We have a couple answers. We have Humility. Oblivion Ring can theoretically do it if it's not hasted in. We have another Humility in the sideboard. So we have a few answers. Also Sphere of Safety. But we don't have the same amount of answers as we do to more normal decks. So those matchups were hard, and that was the big cutoff. Things took a turn when we started running into turn 3 Emrakuls off Show and Tell. As far as the deck itself, it's all about having an Enchantress effect. That's one of the things I was trying to figure out because I'm not very experienced with this deck. Actually, these are the first matches I've ever played with Legacy Enchantress. So I was trying to figure out how often you can keep hands without an Enchantress or a way to get like Enchantress's presence, like Sterling Grove can tutor for it. And I think the answer is pretty small. I think you really need one of those effects. You could see when we had those and could start drawing cards right away, the deck performs really well. When we don't have those, we play a bunch of things that are just not that good. So the deck, one of the cool things about the deck actually is we get to play a lot of enchantments that are only good in specific situations, specific matchups. For example, Elephant Grass, Ruined Halo, City of Solitude, even Oblivion Ring, Leyline of Sanctity. These are cards that are pretty high variance. Some matchups are awesome, some matchups are not very awesome, but we can get away with that because when we have an Enchantress effect, they're all cycling, drawing us a card whenever we cast them, sometimes drawing multiple cards. When we don't have an Enchantress effect, we just play a bunch of bad cards and do nothing and lose. So if you decide to play the deck, I would mulligan aggressively, fairly aggressively, to have an Enchantress effect in your opening hand. The other thing is we didn't run into any Force of Will decks. I could see that being a big problem for this deck because we need those Enchantresses so severely. Once we get them on the battlefield, they're likely to stick. They have Shroud, they're enchantments, not that easy to kill. But getting them on the battlefield can be a challenge against Force, and we just kind of got lucky that we dodged Force decks. I could imagine mulliganing to 6 or 5 to find an Enchantress effect, trying to cast it, getting it Force of Willed, and just losing those games. So that does seem like a weakness. In the late game, City of Solitude, if we get it down, can help, but that does seem like it could be a problem. The last thing is, if you decide to play this deck, it can actually be a pretty effective Legacy budget option if you drop the moat. The moat is the killer. It is super expensive. Sierra Sanctum, kind of expensive. Savannah, kind of expensive. But you can get the deck down to like the $1,000 range in paper, which for a Legacy deck isn't that bad if you're willing to cut the moat. The moat is good, but it's not great. It doesn't actually save us from Emrakul, but it is helpful in some matchups, but it's not much different than something like Humility. So you could just play another Humility for 20 bucks instead of playing the moat, and it might even be better in a lot of situations because it does stop Emrakul where moat doesn't. So anyway, the deck was sweet. I had fun with it. Still learning it, trying to figure out, like I said, what you can keep, what you can't keep, but it's a lot of fun to play. So I don't know. If you want to give it a shot, go for it. It's pretty inexpensive for Legacy on Magic Online and in paper. I think you can get by without the moat if you need to. Anyway, that's been our Much Abrew About Nothing for this week. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon.